South Carolinians are confronted by the militant resistance to this law when they try to capture William and Ellen Craft. William and Ellen Craft had escaped from slavery and traveled nearly 1,000 miles from Macon, Georgia to Boston. The light-skinned Ellen passed as white, with her husband William as her slave. When their owners found out they were in Boston, they sent 2 slave catchers, John Knight and Willis Hughes, to bring them back. Knight and Hughes are determined, declaring, "If we have to stay here to all eternity, and if there are not enough men in Massachusetts to take them, we will bring some up from the South." Hughes and Knight tracked the Crafts to the home of Lewis Hayden. Hayden and his wife, both escaped slaves, were known to hide more than 12 fugitives at a time. Hayden was also known to use any means to protect them, and he has barricaded his house.
He places on either side of his front door kegs of explosives, and he stands there with lighted torch, and he says, "You enter this home at your peril." He threatens to explode the house to kill everybody in the house, including the slave catchers, if the slave catchers attempt to enter.
Backup soon arrives. The Vigilance Committee, a group of mainly black Bostonians, rushes to the Hayden's house. The committee's activities were secret, but the group had successfully rescued other fugitive slaves.
Together, they discourage the activities of the fugitive slave catchers and drive them out of the city.
William and Ellen Craft are spirited away, eventually sailing to England and to freedom. Despite victories like the Crafts, the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act has a devastating effect on the black community. 15,000 black people flee the United States. In Boston, the 12th Street Baptist Church, one of the city's largest African-American churches, loses fully 1/3 of its congregation. Though the ranks of the resistors have been drained, their spirit remains. This is the Boston of 1854, when Anthony Burns, an escaped slave from Virginia, is tracked to the city by his owner, Charles Suttle. Suttle gets a warrant for Burns' arrest under the 1850 Fugitive Slave Act. He hires the infamous Asa Butman, a former Boston constable and now a federal marshal. He checks with his sources and confronts Burns, federal warrant in hand. Burns resists arrest, and a group of white men in a tavern rush outside to help subdue him. Thus begins an incident so well publicized that Boston is forced to see not just a nameless fugitive slave, but Anthony Burns the man, angering even slavery supporters, at least for the moment. Within hours, Lewis Hayden and his colleagues from the Vigilance Committee hear of Burns' arrest. Earlier, they had failed to rescue another captured runaway. Now they vow to make their stand with Anthony Burns. They try to free Burns by attacking the courthouse, but fail. 9 days after Burns' arrest, a federal court judge enforces the fugitive slave law, orders Burns returned to slavery, and collects his $10. Anti-slavery activists believe this expanding federal support of the immoral institution of slavery must be stopped. As word spreads about the ruling, protesters begin to gather, and Boston braces for a showdown.
On the day that he is to be delivered to the ship that is going to take him back to Virginia, hundreds of people line the street. The merchants on the street have draped their windows in black. They have hung a coffin across the main street which says, "Liberty."
President Franklin Pierce responds by sending in federal troops, ironically, from Fort Independence. The Massachusetts infantry and the volunteer militia line the route with orders to shoot if the crowd interferes. Burns is led from the courthouse, guarded by an artillery battalion, 4 platoons of Marines, and a light horse squadron.
People have walked in from not only the immediate vicinity of Boston, but even from western Massachusetts, to watch the shame of their city, as they called it, the shame of their city in the return of Anthony Burns.
A hostile crowd screams in protest at this federal show of force. Nevertheless, Burns is marched to the ship that will take him back to Virginia. The federal government has spent $100,000 to return Anthony Burns to slavery. This slave-catching incident may be the most costly in American history. However, he would be the last runaway returned from Boston. For Burns had made real the human costs of the fugitive slave law. Still, the country was divided over slavery, even in the North. It would take a civil war to get the United States out of the slave-catching business.